Ladies and gentlemen, we are live from the Isle of Man in the UK. This is John and Mike's MMA Corner.
I'm sat here now with a cup of tea, relaxing, after what was a very tough week. I feel like I've went through five 5-minute rounds in the UFC. How do you feel, Jeff?
I think I went through 5 and then 3 as well. I feel like I went on 5-minute rounds for 3 straight nights. How about that?
Yeah, it wasn't. I have to admit, it'd be a lot tougher for you because I was watching it more as I'd say like a fanboy. But yourself, you have to do the write-ups. How, from your perspective, how tough was it? Doing 3 days in a row.
Well, you know what? I'll be honest as well. I don't have the same job as a lot of people who cover the sport. Some of the folks, like the guys that I do that I'm on the MMA Beat with. Those guys have to really pay attention to every single fight, right down from the UFC Fight Pass prelims. There were 34 fights in 3 nights, and they had to pay attention. Most of them had to pay attention to pretty much every single one of them and do something, whether it was write up a short piece or just there was always something. My job, really, both for Sports Illustrated and for the Washington Post, I really write about. Both places have said to me, "We want you to write about big fights," and the way they define big fights is championship fights. So really, there were 2, and so I got to watch as a fan for 2 nights and almost the 3rd night, and then when the last 2 fights came on, that's when I really had to put on my more, I had to put on a different hat and watch with a different set of eyes and be able to write about it. So in a way, I was kind of where you're at in a sense, but and even that way, even just watching them as a fan, it was pretty exhausting.
I was going to say that you didn't have much to write in your last fight, really, did you?
You know what? At least this time I was sitting here at home and got to do it. I remember when the first Fox card came on, and it was Cain Velasquez defending his heavyweight title against Junior Dos Santos. And I flew out to California, was there for a couple days, and just like this, I was asked just to write about the championship fight, and it was 64 seconds long. It took me longer to get from the press room to my seat at cage side than it took for the fight to end. And there was nothing really before that to write about. At least nothing that SI wanted at the time. At least this time we had a 13-second finish in the main event, but we also had a co-main event that had a little bit more going on. And also the truth is, even with only 13 seconds, there was such a big story, so much that was to be told, so much was to be said, that it didn't matter that it was only 13 seconds.
No, it didn't. I suppose when I watched the fight myself, it was nearly 7 o'clock in the morning. So for me, it was kind of glazed eyes, but it was just kind of. I felt a little bit let down. I wanted an epic battle, a fight to remember at first, and then when I had time to think about it, I kind of sat there and went, I'm happy with it. I was happy with the result in the end, the way it went down. I thought, do you know what, it's fine. I had a mixture of emotions, I suppose, and I think maybe I wanted more from Jose Aldo, but there is, there's a lot, Novo Niao, we'll spit that word out. They haven't had the best record since the drug testing's coming now. I'm not allocating that Aldo's done any tests, but one thing that's coming is the IV bans, and it's very prominent in certain fighters with having to get their weight a little bit lower and looking after themselves, and especially with a 5-round fight, they can't cut themselves as much as they would do in the past. Do you feel that this may take an effect in future fights as well as the ones that have happened this weekend?
Well, I think we would be talking about this. I think this might even be the topic of the day if the result had been the opposite. Because you probably watched the weigh-ins, and Conor McGregor looked like a skeleton out there.
Yeah.
He looked terrible. and Aldo looked pretty good at the weigh-ins, right? Mm-hmm. So if anything, you're thinking, okay, well, they can't use an IV to get fluids back into these guys. that means that McGregor's going to be a mess tomorrow night, and Aldo's going to be okay. Well, look what happened on fight night. McGregor came out to the cage looking beautiful. He was he was back to his old self, and he was looking confident and relaxed. I mean, everything that he said he would be, he was. And Aldo, who had been pretty relaxed during fight week and looked good. His spirits were good at the weigh-ins. Well, he walked out to the cage and his jaw was clenched, and he stood in the octagon, looking down at his feet and not moving, stiff. I mean, it was kind of the opposite. So I feel like the whole IV thing, while I recognize it's a big deal, we sort of got the opposite kind of result that what we would have expected if we were thinking what the effect that it was going to have.
Yeah, I am interested to see if Conor can handle so that. Well, I suppose we can talk about that's the main fight. It's the repercussions. What happens with Conor? Now there is reports of him possibly having a broken hand, but at the moment, do you know the one person I feel right now, and I feel like hugging, is Frankie Edgar. Because there's nothing that man can do. That man can't do anymore. Yet he can't get what he deserves, I suppose you could say.
Well, you know what? He might get it, because even before the fight, if you go back and listen to some of the things that Conor McGregor said, which at the time seemed almost unfathomable. No matter how much of a fan of the guy you were, if you go back and listen, if you were listening to that at the time, he was saying how he was going to just go out and destroy Jose Aldo, which nobody had touched Jose Aldo for 10 years, so it seemed kind of absurd that anybody would think that. But here is this guy who's so confident he's going to do that. That's what he said he was going to do. And then he said, and after I destroyed Jose Aldo, I'm going to go up to the lightweight division and win that belt, unless Frankie Edgar goes out and has a great fight against Chad Mendes and finishes Chad Mendes, or he made some comment about how it was sort of like the ball was in Frankie's court. If you go out there and if Mendes had won the fight, then forget about it, because Conor's already beaten him. And if Edgar had won the fight, but it was kind of a split decision or a tight decision or disputed, or a fight that was not that exciting, well, then it would be a good sensible move for both Conor McGregor and the UFC to go right ahead and schedule that lightweight title challenge, especially if it happens to be Cowboy Cerrone, because you can imagine the build-up between Cowboy and McGregor, all the talking that would go on. So. But Edgar kind of, I think, put a little bit of was a bit of a fly in the ointment there, because he put on a spectacular performance, and he got that great knockout. And so, in a sense, I think that I would not say that he's out of it. I'd say that it's kind of a 50-50 deal. I feel like a lot of it depends on how this weekend's lightweight fight goes. I feel like if Cowboy Cerrone wins, there's going to be a little bit more excitement about the idea of McGregor and Cerrone, and Dos Anjos, for all of his skill and he's already beaten Cowboy Cerrone, for all of what he's done and beating Anthony Pettis, his style is really interesting to watch, but I don't think that he has the same kind of profile that's going to generate a lot of excitement for him to defend against McGregor, and it might happen, but I feel like it would be I feel like the scales would balance a little bit more in favor of Frankie Edgar. Of course, if Conor decides that he does want to fight, he will fight Frankie Edgar, which I think is probably what the UFC would prefer. McGregor then has a little bit of a bargaining chip and say, well, you want me to do that? Well, let's do that fight right in my hometown in Dublin.
Yeah, maybe try and get a stadium fit. And he keeps harping on about the stadium, and Dana's negotiated with that and said it's the it's not the fact that we can't do it in a stadium. It's the effort they have to put into it, and I can see where Dana comes from that perspective. But like you say, it does really fall on this fight, because if Cerrone wins, Cerrone's got that mouth, and kind of like Conor, he can sell a fight with just his talk, and Cowboy doesn't hold back with what he says, and Rafael dos Anjos, he is quite a respectable fighter, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I suppose the debate comes in with Aldo wanting a rematch, because he'll say, look, I got caught, it happens, everyone can have an off day, and in 10 years I've had one off day. I believe that if I came back I can win, and then everyone will say, well, Ronda Rousey's getting a rematch. Almost everyone gets an immediate rematch. Maybe Aldo will want to put his foot in there, and it's a bit unclear. And I think, like you say, I think the UFC are waiting until this weekend is over before they start hinting to what could happen in the future.
Yeah, I suppose that they're waiting, but I kind of feel like they've already made some hints a little bit that just I don't know. It may just be me reading into things, but it just seems like the UFC did not treat Aldo with the same kind of respect that it treated Ronda Rousey in the wake of the loss. I don't know if you saw online that the UFC put up some of the locker room footage of Aldo both before and then when he came back, kind of despondent, came back to his locker room and he had a towel over his head. He was just sitting there motionless in his locker room. I mean, I feel like that's kind of a low blow for a guy who's been your champion for a lot of years. And, I think Aldo kind of didn't do them any favor. I think there was still some resentment over him dropping out of the summertime fight. But in a way, I think he kind of did them a favor. If this same thing had happened back in, what was that fight going to be, in July, if this happened back then, there was always going to be that question of, Aldo had hurt ribs, or let's say, something happened with, didn't McGregor had an injury as well back then. This was two healthy guys, and that's the way it should be. And Aldo did the right thing by dropping out of the fight over the summer. Now we got to see a clean competition between two guys who are healthy, and that's the way it should be. But I don't know if the UFC looked at it that way. I think they're kind of looking at they're insisting that Ronda Rousey get a rematch, and I think in some ways she is less deserving, entitled to a rematch than Aldo. Aldo got clipped with one shot. It happens to the best of them, and not taking nothing at all away from McGregor. He's the guy that connected. It's not a lucky shot. He knew what he was doing. He threw the shot. He connected, and he finished the job. Great for Conor. But that was, one shot that Aldo hit. Look at Rousey. Rousey was pretty much picked apart for a round and a half before Holly Holm finished her, and it was a much more defining. I think we got a better picture of how those two stack up than we did in this fight. I mean, I'd love to see these guys go at it again, but I think that certainly McGregor again. I think McGregor deserves the right to defend that belt in his hometown, and if they can make it happen at Croke Park, make Jose Aldo. You want the rematch? You're going to come out there. They made Chad Mendes go down to Rio, so why not make Jose Aldo, go to Dublin?
Yeah, I know. I think they could do it with Joanna Jędrzejczyk as a co-main event. I think they could certainly do that. Yeah, man, I'm buying that one. But again, by saying this, we do kind of sort of shove poor Frankie Edgar to the side, and he's very much deserving. So I mean, I feel like Conor in the aftermath of the fight, one of the things he said, one of the things he repeated several times was, I've got options. I love options, and I like that he recognized that he has options. It's not just a matter of him sitting back and letting the UFC dictate to him who's going to be next. He has some options, and even if they decide, if they're the ones that want to decide who the next opponent is, and really the truth is that it shouldn't be the champion who picks an opponent. It should be the sanctioning body or the promotion who picks an opponent for him. But so be it. Let them pick the opponent, but he should have some say in where that fight takes place. Yeah, I agree with you as well. It should be a slight balance for the fighter, and the UFC, of course, they wanted to go to Vegas because it's money. They know what money it can bring in. But again, I think, like you said, they'd make a ton of money if they went to Ireland. Now I want to talk then about some of the results from the fight night. Okay, so again, like we said, there's over 30 fights, so it's hard to remember all of them. But one performance that stood out more than any was Rose against Paige Van Zandt. That was 5-round mauling, to be honest, and she looked like a different person compared to what I've seen her fight before, and I was absolutely astonished by that performance. In Paige, just not for one moment was she in that fight.
Yeah, it's true. I feel like I was kind of tricked with that one because I was. I've seen. You probably, if you watched when Namajunas was on the Ultimate Fighter, that was probably the one season in recent years where I've actually watched the fights because it was leading to a championship. And she looked really good on that show. She didn't look so good when she went out and fought Carla Esparza for the belt, but prior to that, she looked really, really good. And I remembered that, and I was thinking, kind of instinctively thinking, well, this is a bit of a jump for Paige Van Zandt. But then in the lead up to the fight, I noticed that Van Zandt was the favorite, and it sort of, I feel like it kind of infected my thinking, and I started thinking in terms of, well, Van Zandt's the favorite, so how's Rose going to stack up with her? And so by the time the fight came around, I was kind of expecting Paige Van Zandt to take her, and then when it started unfolding the way it did, I was like, oh yeah, this is a fighter who's looked really good. Other than her last one, she's looked really good, and Van Zandt is still new at the game, and boy, do we see that. I mean, her toughness was certainly notable, but in terms of her ability to really truly compete, it was kind of a little bit similar to that Demi and Maya fight that we saw on I guess that was, let's see, was that Saturday night?
Saturday night.
Yeah, that one. Where again, I give Gunnar Nelson all the credit in the world for trying to for saying, I'm a jiu-jitsu guy and I'm going to try to compete with the best jiu-jitsu guy out there, and he went for it doggedly, but boy, he got schooled just like Paige Van Zandt's got schooled by Namajunas.
Yeah, for me I think that's a great thing that happened to Paige. I think Paige, she was riding that momentum wave, and I think she kind of believed in the kind of almost hype that she had behind her. And I thought, when I watched Paige, she is a scrappy opponent. She will fight to get that position, and she'll win the position battle because of her will to get there more than some people will. But Rose just snuffed everything out. Every time she tried to get there, Rose just was technically on point and was able to stop her with a technique rather than just sheer will. And I think for Paige, she needed she needed it.
Because she was so tough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think Paige now can go away for 6 months off. She can go, because now there's not going to be that hype behind her. She can go away for 6 months and quietly just build herself up. Get that strength in so she can compete with some of the fighters. Because I think she was a bit outmuscled in that fight as well. And I think if you put her against Joanna Jędrzejczyk, like she talked about, could you imagine a face at the end of that fight? Never mind a fight with like Rose hit her hard. Imagine how hard Joanna's going to hit her in the face.
Yeah, that would have been a disaster. I mean, I guess all I would say about Paige and what this does for her, I feel like it would have served her well if she'd had even a few little glimmers of a few moments where she was able to get Rose in trouble, but it seemed like it never really happened, and it seemed like at every single turn Rose had an answer for her. So I feel like that's the one thing. I think we're gonna see what Paige Van Zandt's mental ability, mental state is. How is she able to put that all behind her? Is she able to sort of bounce back mentally? I mean, it's really that mental side of the game as well as her learning some more skills.
Yeah, I hope that like you say, she can go away from it and just accept that it's part of the sport. You've got to learn. You've got to stand there and go, okay, I'm not at that level. I'm maybe just around the top 10 mark. I'm not top 5. I need to go and sharpen myself up, and I hope she does. But for Rose, she now has to, she's obviously, I don't think she's ready for a title shot yet. I think the next title shot is obviously that Dana White said it. It's Claudia Gadelha against Joanna Jędrzejczyk. That is the most logical fight there is out there in the rematch, and I fully look forward to that fight anyway. For Rose, you could put her, maybe they talked about maybe her and Tisha Torres.
Yeah, maybe she gets a rematch with Esparza, and because she seems to have figured out a few things since that loss. Or who knows? I mean, I think that she's definitely on the rise, and she's going in the right direction. The other thing though, you were talking about the lessons learned, and I hope the UFC learned a little bit of a lesson there too, because this kind of thing wouldn't happen to other fighters who are at the technical level of Paige Van Zandt, because they haven't been pushed to the extent that she has been pushed. Mm-hmm. She's really a person who probably deserves to be not quite in the top 15 rankings, but sort of out in the periphery of that. You know, a very good fighter, but just not quite at that top level yet. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the UFC was pushing her because she's a beautiful young woman. That was really the thing. I mean, same thing. We're gonna start seeing something happen with this Sage Northcutt, this 19-year-old handsome young guy with all kinds of flashy stuff going on. We'll see. He had a little bit of a difficult fight as well. He ended up winning it and persevering, but I think the UFC sometimes has to tap the brakes a little bit and say, okay, well, let's let these people develop in a more sensible way instead of just throwing them in there in with the Lions.
Yeah, exactly. For example, they put her as a main event. They put them so high on the card. I don't see why they couldn't have put them lower on the card. They could have still given them that kind of exposure to not that maybe extent, but some. I am agreeing with you. Me and Mike have spoke about this before, where they see that it's. I love them. I love the UFC. I love MMA. I compete in it. I watch it. I do love it. But the UFC, they will treat people like cattle in the sense of they will milk them dry until they need them, and then they will push them away. And it's a business. I understand that's what the UFC is. But I think with someone that young, like you say, that could literally, some stuff like that can absolutely ruin a young kid. And you don't want to see it. And I think that you're dead on there. They should be a lot more careful with these young people. They should nurture them in a better way. Rather than look at them as a way to get money, they should treat them like human beings more. Yeah,
they have to. That's certainly, that's something that all businesses really ought to be paying attention to. But the UFC. Pretty much does what it wants to do with its athletes, and the athletes have not banded together and not even indicated much interest in banding together in any kind of association or fighters union or anything that will kind of even the playing field a little bit. So it is really up to the UFC to make the right calls, the right decisions, and ultimately it's to the company's own interest. I mean, look what they did with McGregor. Here's a guy that was a young talent, and they took a little bit of heat by the way they matched him up early on. In fact, I would say that even myself, I would see some of his early fights and think, well, they're really kind of they're bringing him along very slowly, and they're not giving him someone who's going to just try to immediately take him down to the mat. They're giving him opponents that he can show off against, that he can show his skills against. But by doing that, it got him certainly his confidence got built up, and it also got the fans excited to watch him, and he got better, and he got to the point where he now is the champion of the world and beat a guy who hadn't lost in 10 years. And I think in that case, the UFC is to be commended for bringing him along correctly. And I don't know whether it's because McGregor is who he is, and he helped kind of keep things moving at the right pace. But they're not going to get it right all the time, and luckily they don't get it wrong all the time either.
No, yeah, we can have a go at them all day. Like, for example, I love the discussion you guys had on the last MMA Beat about the UFC kit, for example. That you kind of said what everyone was thinking all years. So you can't get everything right, is the best way to put it. And Reebok certainly do kind of empower that.
They managed to get everything wrong, though. That's different.
Yeah.
Although not necessarily, because look at this past weekend. There was some people who talked a little bit about how McGregor came in with the green shorts. And this was something that other fighters were, they weren't tailoring shorts or any kind of apparel to a fighter, and particularly with colors and all that. And that was a good thing. I mean, that now if Conor hadn't got out there and won, then we would be, Reebok would be getting all kinds of criticism. But they ended up doing something and learning that this drew some attention, and maybe they do the same thing when they get some other fighters who are prominent fighters who are well known and or have a big public profile. You tell your apparel to draw the attention for the right thing instead of misspelling names on them.
Well, yeah, I did think that. I did speak to a couple of friends about that. I said, because they're both, in theory, because I know he's interim title holder at the time, because they're both champions, I did say, are they both going to wear black? Because I did wonder what McGregor was going to win. I suppose they came to that logic sense of the green and the amount of Irish fans that were in there. One fight, I think, as well, that a performance from the weekend, I think, because you got to watch it as a fan, was Barboza versus Ferguson, and Ferguson is really turning into that lightweight title contender.
Yeah, he's sort of, he kind of reminds me, not really in the way he fights, but he brings back some memories of when John Jones first came into the game. And again, not because of the way he fights exactly, but in that Jones used to do things that you'd think that can't work. You know, some of the spinning crazy stuff that he used to do. That he really, you know, if you watch John Jones now, he doesn't really do that stuff anymore. But when he first came up, he was doing all kinds of very creative stuff. And Ferguson also was doing really some creative stuff that I thought just wasn't going to work. And you know, some of that stuff where he just sort of tumbles forward and you know, appears to put himself in a bad position, but really doesn't. He kind of, you know, even when Barboza seemed to know it was coming, it still worked. So yeah, I mean, I think that Ferguson is rising quickly, but you know, it takes two to tango, and I give a lot of credit to Edson Barboza. He definitely gave some trouble to Ferguson, and he threatened him a few times. So that was the fight that you know, if I was thinking about what was the best fight of the whole time, the whole weekend, that, you know, a significant fight at least, and one that was competitive, that was the one that I thought was pretty competitive. Even though it ended with a submission, I think, in the second round, while it was going on, it was a lot more competitive than a lot of the other fights. Yeah,
it was. I think I woke up my neighbours with me shouting at that fight because it was constant. It was just great to watch. Like we said, we talked about Frankie Edgar before then. What do you think? I think personally for Chad Mendes, he needs to go and take a little bit of time off. That's 2 KO finishes now, and he recently signed that deal with the UFC. You know, and you know, I think he needs to just go away and just have a bit of time to himself to recover, because I don't think you can take 2 knockouts in 2 fights and be the same guy. I think he definitely needs to go and take away maybe 8 months out of the game and just let himself heal up.
I'm always leery when I see a guy take another knockout after he's already had one. And you know, here's the thing though. I even though yes, he was knocked out, just like Aldo was knocked out. And in both cases, those were pretty quick finishes. And I guess I get more nervous about fighters who take a more sustained beatdown, like for example Chris Weidman. You know, he took the end of the third round, which I'm pretty astounded. As much as I love Herb Dean as a referee, I was pretty amazed that fight went into a 4th round, because at the end of the third round, I rewatched the fight, and Weidman, or Rockhold, after he had Weidman down in the last minute or so, threw 88 straight punches and punches and elbows to the head. Now, he didn't land every single one of them. Some missed entirely, and several of them hit Weidman in the arms. But of the 88 blows to the head, I would say that probably, you know, a good 60 or so, maybe even more, landed on his head, and he was badly battered. And I worry more about guys like that who take a sustained beating. You know, I think of Junior Dos Santos in the second and the third meetings with Cain Velasquez. You know, then you can think of some other people too. Those are the ones that I get more nervous about. At least with Mendes, in both of his knockouts, they were pretty quick. But you're right. You know, you don't know what the you know, concussions are all the rage now. This is the thing that we talk about in sports now that we never really did talk about until recently. You think about not just with MMA, but with any sport. Nobody talked about concussions. It was always, well, you know, he got his bell rung. That's what we always say. You know, in football, he got his bell rung, so he's off on the sideline for a play. And then once he'll get back out there and try to play some more. And nowadays, it's a different game, and we're starting to recognize the effects that can be long term. So even though, you know, to me, visually, it's more bothersome to watch somebody take a sustained beat down. you're right. It might be that something, just even 2 knockouts like that, would be something that he needs to step back and stay out of it for a while. He definitely needs to reassess things for sure.
Yeah, because again, with the quick knockouts, it can affect obviously the brain, and I think, like you say, it comes back again to the IV bands. Because they're not potentially rehydrating how they used to be able to. There is that worry that they can become a bit more tendency to get knocked out. But with, like I say, with Mendes, with his situation, because he's had 2 losses in a row, and he just seems like he's always the bridesmaid and never the bride. He just can't quite get, like, almost like Uriah Faber in the UFC. He always keeps falling short at that belt. And I feel that maybe if he did take a bit of time away, it might help him. People have said that maybe he should go down to 135 and bits like that. I don't know if that's the case necessarily.
What's he gonna do? Cut one of his legs off? I mean, the guy doesn't. I don't know that he's
massive. He
probably has a hard enough time getting to the weight class he's in.
Yeah, he is absolutely yoked. But I think that for Mendes, I think a bit of time away, it would definitely help him. I think he can come back a lot more refreshed, and he can maybe, just start again, maybe fight guys from maybe rank 6 and work his way back up to a title shot. I don't think he should maybe be throwing himself into those kind of fights again. But that's not for, obviously, me to say. Health-wise, I think the UFC, I know they're investing in this anyway, the kind of brain damage, and they're doing a lot of research into it and stuff like that, which is great for the fighters. And I think that maybe the UFC should maybe talk to guys when they have maybe 2 knockouts or a couple of knockouts, say, look, just go away for a while and come back, because you might get a better fight. And like I say, now, by the way, with the IV bans, ladies and gentlemen, I am saying that they do have a ban, but no one's sitting next to the guys for the full time that from when they've weighed in to when they fight, to monitor them if they do have an IV in. I'm only saying that because Mike has been witness to a coach getting into an elevator with IV bags after the IV ban and asking if he was a nurse or a doctor. And obviously we knew what he was doing with his fighter. So it's clearly still going on because no one's going to monitor them. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. How do you test that? You can test for PEDs, but how do you test for whether someone has been given a saline solution or whatever it is that they're rehydrating with?
Yeah.
It definitely is. And also, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I think it's kind of going at things the wrong way. It's saying, well, you can't we're not going to, it's been somewhat established that IV is a good way to rehydrate, and so they're going to say, well, we're not going to let you rehydrate in the proper way. We're just going to say you can't do that, so that'll be your incentive to not cut as much weight. But I don't know that people really look at it that way. I don't know that they really will still cut weight in a better way or not go down an extra weight class. I think it would be a better thing if they did something a little different, or they made them. I know that it would not be practical to do day of fight weigh-ins, but have some kind of a system where significant weight loss is not part of the equation here. That look at we've talked about Frankie Edgar. Here's a guy that cuts hardly any weight, and look at how fresh he is when he goes out there and competes. I mean, I know that analogy doesn't work. I mean, if we look at Conor McGregor, he's a skeleton at the weigh-ins, and then he goes out there and looks fantastic too. So he's figured something out. He's figured out the answer, but not every guy can figure that out. And it would just be a safer sport, I think, or be one element of making it a safer sport would be to somehow come to grips with how much weight is safe for someone to lose in advance of a fight.
No, it would, Jeff. I admit, because I cut down to I had a fight at 170, and my body just went into reject. It rejected me big time. My kidneys went. The cramps were everywhere. I couldn't even walk 50 yards without having to sit down to get my breath back. I couldn't even eat. When I tried to eat with a knife and fork, the cramp would the cramp would stop me being able to hold anything, and my body just rejected it. And so when that happened, it kind of helped me kind of accept that my body can only go to certain limits with the weight cutting. And I think, like you say, people shouldn't be able to maybe drop so much. And I think it's one of them ones where they need to maybe have a maybe they should, like, I think with wrestling, don't they do it with wrestling where they in the States where they measure their body weight and they say you can only cut so much down, I believe, off the top of my head.
I believe there's some, I think there's been different ways that they've tried to address it. I'm not familiar with all of the nuts and bolts of it, but I know that they've done some things because, the light heavyweight champion in the UFC, Daniel Cormier was all set to compete in the Olympics, and his body shut down during a weight cut. So it's not unusual. This happens to people. We just saw, the fighter in the ONE FC who tragically died as a result of, or at least following his attempted weight cut. This is a significant thing, and I hate to think that something that tragic things have to happen before we really act, but it is kind of the way we operate. And if anything, look at the message that the UFC was sending out when Ronda Rousey was at the top of the world, and the one person who was thought to be able to challenge her and compete with her was Chris Cyborg Justino. Well, the UFC would not agree to have that fight happen at a catchweight. They insisted on her cutting down to 135 pounds to meet Rousey because she was the champion there. When Cyborg, I think walks around at something above 160, I think.
170
so,
she does, yeah. She's about 170.
Yeah, it's kind of, so, it's really not sending the right message. And, they would have been, if they wanted us to say, look, these are two women in two different weight classes, forget about it, that's fine, I'd accept that. But then to suggest that she has to cut down to that weight is, I think, kind of just a bad message.
Yeah, it is. It's crazy the way they suggested that. I was blown away. I thought you would make just as much. The UFC would have made just as much money having it at a catchweight at 140 than they would at 130. That it wouldn't have made a difference. It was just the fact that if the fight happened, it would have. That's all people cared about. With the IVs, what I spoke about with Mike is I said, why can't they have, after the weigh-ins, have two separate rooms? So you have obviously your blue corner and your red corner, and they have nurses there themselves. So they take a blood sample before. If you want to have an IV. They say, you put your hand up and say, I'd like to have an IV. They take your blood, so then they have it on record. Then they have their own IV bags there, the registered nurses, so they're all there. And then they IV you, and then they take a sample. And obviously later on when they do a sample, they can say, right, okay, well, here you go, that's the test results. We know what you were before, and we know what you were after. I don't know why a simple little solution like that would just potentially save fighters from potential brain damage, and obviously just the health.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, this is, I guess in some ways, I mean, I think this was what the U.S. Anti-Doping Association that was agency that was that had the IV ban, if I'm not mistaken. But it's something, unfortunately in the U.S. the most powerful athletic commission in combat sports is in Nevada, and I say unfortunately because it's the most irresponsible and kind of amateur hour athletic commission. There are athletic commissions in California and in New Jersey that aren't perfect, but they do things with a little bit of sense. But the people in Vegas, I probably get in trouble for continuing to say this, but I've said it on the MMA Beat and others. My colleagues have said the same thing. I just feel it's a corrupt organization that it has nothing to do with really handling a fight game, but it really has everything to do with making the most money it can for its state. It does it in mixed martial arts. It does it in boxing. Banning certain fighters, banning a guy like Nick Diaz for smoking pot. This is a really big performance-enhancing drug. I can see that's really going to go out. That's really going to make you bigger, stronger, faster. And then at the same time, they're handing out promoters' license to the likes of Floyd Mayweather because he makes them a ton of money. Mm-hmm. So this is what happens in Nevada, and so they, without really even putting any deep thought. I mean, the thought that you put into your scenario that you created there, that makes perfect sense. But that's not something they're even interested in. They're just out there trying to make the most money, and it's kind of criminal, really.
It is. It's like, I think I heard someone say that the Nevada State Athletic State Commission need someone to look after them. They need someone monitoring them while they monitor everyone else. It is like that, like you said, that there's so many stuff there you said that just, I've read it, I've seen it, and I just can't believe it sometimes what they do and how they act, especially considering Anderson Silva only got a year for what he did, and it just, yeah. So, but they know how much Anderson brings. But
don't get me started. Don't get me started.
I know. Do you know what?
Sitting here for 4 hours of me ridiculing them.
Jeff, we like to pull people into rabbit holes. It's great. That's what we do. We already tapped on it briefly before. Maia versus Nelson. Damian Maia he is one of the guys who I feel can take the least amount of damage I've ever known. He's so elusive, but yet he's probably got more ring time than a lot of the other fighters, and he's been hit the least. He's such a smart fighter, and he's just short of that title shot again. I know he's asking for one. I think he needs one more fight, and then he should get it myself. What that performance he did, that showed as well the difference between a black belt and a Damian Maia black belt as well. It was just majestic, wasn't it?
It really was. Now, I'm not a jiu-jitsu practitioner, so a lot of the technical stuff, while I love it and I watch it, I'm not one who can say, well, this guy, if he only moved his arm to the right instead of left. But I watched that and I kept thinking that Gunnar Nelson was doing the right thing over and over again. The kind of thing that probably works for him when he competes. It competes with against anybody else, but Maia just always had an answer, and there were times when, if I'm not mistaken, there was some moments where it looked like Maia was riding a little too high, and Nelson was trying to do something that would get him off of his back, but it just wasn't working. He just had certain little tiny adjustments that Nelson just couldn't. Nelson had no answer for, and it was really beautiful to watch. I mean, I'm sometimes you go to UFC fights and the fans are impatient when it comes to a grappling match, but this one you didn't hear. I might be wrong. I should probably watch it again. But as I was watching it live, I don't remember there being any boos or any kind of discontent coming out of the crowd, which is pretty unusual for a grappling match. People tend to not want to watch that stuff. They want to watch the rock'em sock'em robots. And but people, I think, even out in the crowd maybe they knew going in that this is Demian Maia. We're going to see a grappling match. But people seem to be fascinated by watching a guy. Really, it was like I credit Gunnar Nelson for trying to do this against him. It was almost like Gunnar Nelson became the canvas, on which another masterpiece was painted.
Yeah, he was. It was beautiful to watch. I was just in awe, really, and I hoped that fight happened the way it did, because Gunnar Nelson, I felt that Gunnar Nelson his style is almost Machida-ish, where maybe Maia wouldn't have been able to get hold of him to get him down with that footwork, the in and out movement from Nelson, and he might have been able to catch him with a counter strike. And I thought, please, I wanted that fight to happen, because I still feel let down with the Frank Mir and Josh Barnett fight. I just feel like we've missed out on a kind of Maia Nelson fight where it just was on the ground. I wish that Meta Morris or even Eddie Bravo Invitation would just get Mir and Barnett together and just do grappling only, because that's just a question for me. I just want that answered.
Yeah, I agree. I would love to see that. Ultimately, it comes down to both guys wanting to do something, and you see when most people go to the ground with Maia, they don't do it usually. They usually don't do it willingly, but and all their energy goes into trying to get off the ground, and that makes a lot of sense. I would say that if really the smartest thing to do in a fight with Demian Maia is to do everything you can do to get off the ground. You've gained a lot of ground by just getting off the ground because he's just too good there. But but again, to Gunnar Nelson's credit, he really wanted to test himself. He really wanted to see what he could do, and yeah, he came up short. He got really dominated in that fight, but I have a lot of respect for that guy, and I think that this is a fight that Nelson is going to benefit from. The next time he goes out there and he faces somebody who's not Demian Maia, Gunnar Nelson's going to be the one who's going to be doing all the dominating on the ground.
Yeah, and Gunnar Nelson looked in really good condition going into that fight. He looked a lot better than he had done before as well, and I reckon I would not be surprised if Gunnar Nelson tried to maybe work with Demian Maia on a grappling side of things, because I would love to just have 15 minutes of rolling with Maia. Of course, I would have a sore neck and arm and leg, and I'd be tapping out for probably about 15 minutes of the whole thing, but you just have to be a sponge with Maia. I feel though as well for Maia, he needs probably one more fight either. I'm not saying when Hector Lombard is back, you've got like the likes of Hector Lombard, Tyron Woodley, someone like that would be a good matchup for Maia to just finish off, or maybe the winner. Oh no, that's a bit too late because you got Stephen Thompson against Johnny Hendricks coming up, which is an absolutely tremendous welterweight bout as well. I feel that Maia's maybe one more fight away from that title shot.
It's interesting because 3 of the 4 people you mentioned are also wrestlers, also grapplers. So it's always interesting to see a guy who's a high level wrestler going against a high level jiu-jitsu guy to see whose ground game will persevere. I mean, basically, it puts the wrestler mostly in a defensive position because the end result of his game is to pin somebody, and that doesn't really that doesn't work in MMA. And whereas the end result of the jiu-jitsu guy's game, of course, is to submit, and so the wrestler, all he really gets to do is to avoid submissions. But still, it's really interesting. But then you talk about Stephen Thompson. I don't know. That would be a tough one because he can strike from long range, and I think that would be a really tough matchup for Maia to. That would be a tough matchup because he'd have to get inside of the guy and get him down, and then once he did, I think he'd have his way with him. Yeah,
he'd just be a backpack again. If I say Jose Aldo versus Max Holloway, what would you say to that?
I'll watch it. Sure, I'll watch it. I think that that's a fight. I mean, Max Holloway's a guy who's rising, and his time to get a title shot he's building toward it, but he's already had his opportunity to fight McGregor. In fact, he fought a McGregor who was injured, so it was the one sort of ground and pound McGregor we saw, and I wouldn't feel bad. Like sometimes you feel bad when you see a guy who's rising suddenly get a fight that promises, or at least might most likely is going to send him back down the pecking order a little bit. But in this case, here's a guy who's already had his chance to compete against the person who's now the reigning champion. And so if he wants to get another chance, what better way than to beat the old champ?
Yeah, I just think that for Holloway, he's a bit stuck, like you say. There's not too many guys out there now who's left to fight to get that title shot, because can't have him against Frankie, because to be honest, Frankie deserved the shot before him. So I think he's just behind Frankie. If Frankie gets that shot, then it would be Holloway. If you're going to give Frankie the shot, I think Aldo should face Holloway. One fight that I think let everyone down. Obviously I'm not talking about the Gonzaga fight. That was just 15 minutes of pain. But the one fight was Jacare versus Romero. I was gutted that fight was not the fight I thought it was going to be.
Yeah, Romero's a funny guy. He's really great for about a round, and then he this fight he wasn't as visibly gassed out as he has been in the past, but only because he had Jacare so hurt that all Romero just kind of stood on the outside from the Romero just, but you could tell Romero did not have the. Think about Jacare coming out of the second off his bench, off his stool, I should say, for the second round. I mean, he had 60 seconds to recover from the beatdown that he took in the first round, and he was not recovered. And you know that if Romero had a little more energy in him, he certainly would have a chance to get a finish, but he just didn't have it in him. And I don't know. I feel like that was one of those fights where there was no real winner in a kind of a way. I mean, I felt like Jacare lost, so he, now I know that a lot of people felt like Jacare should have won. There were some people who scored the fight for him. I actually thought that the fight was either Romero or a draw, because I thought the first round should have been a 10-8, and so the worst thing that could have happened to Romero in my mind was to get a draw if they gave the second and third rounds to Jacare. And I thought the third round clearly was Jacare, and the second round, flip of the coin. So I don't feel like Jacare was robbed there. And then Romero, well, yeah, he got his arm raised, but do you really think that you put him in there with a guy like Luke Rockhold, who's got cardio for days? I just don't think that unless Romero does something pretty spectacular and finishes him pretty fast, I just wouldn't think that he would have a good. I wouldn't like his chances against a guy who's like Rockhold right now.
That was my point to you. Really, it was how can you? I thought that was the fight to decide who was going to be the next challenger, and I just didn't see it. I just didn't see two guys who were wanting to win to fight for that belt. It seemed for me, it was a very much it was deflated performances. I know obviously when Jacare got hurt, everything was a bit upside down for him, so he was probably just went back to kind of muscle memory and safety mode. But I thought that like Rockhold, or even if Weidman had won, I thought I couldn't imagine a pair of those guys. Well, Romero going in with them. I just can't picture the UFC putting Romero in. But then again, I can see them doing it because they know Romero hasn't got a lot of time left, and it's one of those ones where they know he's not the spring chicken, and maybe they need to get him in to get the title shot. So then once they've got that challenger. He's a challenger, so once they've given him that shot, and even if he does lose, at least then they can go to another challenger who's maybe not as old, and they can keep going. I think that's impossible, but then again, you've got the Vitor fight, which Rockhold wants, which I don't want to see either myself, because I just think, Vitor now being a welterweight, now that he's not on his chicken and rice, I think it's a fight that I don't want to see.
No, I absolutely have zero interest in that. And when I first heard Rockhold mentioned that, it was on the post-fight show on Fox, and Michael Bisping was right there on the panel, and I know that Bisping and Rockhold are not great buddies, but I felt like that was a good opportunity for Bisping to say, listen, don't give that title shot to Belfort. You know what? You and I, well, I'll do something. I'll do you a favor. I'll fight Belfort. I mean, look, Belfort knocked out Rockhold. He knocked out Bisping. They both have a gripe with him, and I would love to see Bisping have a go at him. But I'm not really interested in seeing Rockhold have a go at him because he doesn't deserve a title shot, and so Bisping, that was a good opportunity for him to say, look, I'll do it. I'll take him out for both of us, and you just go and defend the belt, and I'll see you later on after I build myself back up and get my title shot. I mean, I think that was Michael's. Michael likes to talk. That would have been a good chance for him to kind of like almost sideways.
Yeah, kind of build bridges with Luke Rockhold in a way, but I think you're dead on. Obviously, because Bisping's going to fight Mousasi in London, but. Yeah. I think Rockhold, he's not in that top. I know I don't listen to the rankings because the rankings are just not. They're a bit of an abomination, but I don't see Rockhold as ever getting to that title shot level again. TRT Rockhold, Vitor, yeah, definitely. TRT Vitor, he was super impressive, but I just can't see it happening again.
No, I think his time has passed. I mean, he can win. He can win some fights. There's no doubt he's not finished. But in terms of competing against the top guys, well, look, even if he is able to do it, I just don't think that I don't think he deserves to do it. I don't think that he deserves to get the opportunity to do it. Yeah. I think he would need to work his way back up. If he believes that he still has that in him, okay, great. Do it. Without undergo drug testing like crazy. and try to work your way back up. And maybe you fight. Who knows? I'm not even sure who the next person for him to take on. And then maybe eventually, if Bisping takes care of Visasi, maybe they end up meeting. And if Vitor can beat all these guys, sure, then let's see it happen. But I just don't see that. I don't see that coming to fruition.
No, I'd like to see Machida and Vitor myself. I'd like that fight to happen. I think that'd be quite an interesting fight.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, it seems like Machida's been on a bit of a downslide too. I mean, Vitor is more so like doesn't look physically the way he used to, and he's been fighting more in the he fought 45-year-old Dan Henderson, I guess was the last one. So it's I don't know. I mean, I'm fine with him. I sort of look at the guys in that place, and I'm like, whatever matchups the UFC wants to make there, that's when they're looking at it, what's a fight that maybe will draw a few eyeballs, and maybe some if you throw it early on in a main card, and maybe people will pay attention, or maybe you make it the main event or co-main event of a Fight Pass or a one of the other fights, non-pay-per-views. That's fine, but I'm more interested in knowing who the UFC is going to put in there with the champion, and I want to make sure that those decisions are made based on the merit of who deserves those title shots, not just on who's going to make the most money. Exactly,
that's the worry. Yeah, you just think, is it the name that's getting him the title shot, not the credentials? Yeah, if, like Vitor lost, he got battered by Weidman. I know Vitor had a little kind of burst at the start, but after that he just got absolutely mauled, and then he beat Henderson. I think Henderson only had one win in his last 6 or something like that. So it's not, like you say, it's not something that you can sit there with the credentials and say I deserve another title shot. Now, Weidman, no, mention him. Not the smartest move, doing that spinning back kick, which literally kind of changed the shape of the fight. It was. I had it down as 1-1 going into the third round. I had it as 1-1. I thought they both had absolutely clobbered each other in both enough in both rounds to kind of balance the damage. And then the third round, I thought Weidman was starting to find his range a bit, and then all of a sudden he did that. I don't know what he was doing.
I don't know. I mean, I would love to know what he was thinking of that. I guess it's not thinking exactly, but what it was that caused that to happen with him. You sort of wonder about fighters when they pull off something that's kind of a crazy, some kind of a crazy move, and then they end up getting finished. I mean, you think back to when the second fight between Chael Sonnen and Anderson Silva, and he throws that sort of spinning back fist, the kind of thing that he never does. Now, I know Weidman does sometimes throw big kicks, but this was not a kick that you normally see him throw. And I also know that's the same kind of kick that knocked out Rockhold for Vitor, I believe. So I don't know whether that was something that he trained for, but I don't know. It just seems to me that that in this fight he needed to just, he was the sort of more brawny guy. He was the guy that needed to get inside, grab a hold of Rockhold, and sort of try to bully him a little bit. And that was not really the way to do it. And so it was weird because I sort of looked at it almost like a desperation move when there wasn't a need for desperation unless he was hurting a little more than we realized. But he was taking a lot of body shots. Maybe he was feeling more damaged and just felt like he needed to do something a little bit crazy to change the course of the fight. But like you said, I had it the same way. I felt like the two rounds, both the first round was I thought pretty close, but I would have given it to Weidman. The second round I think was clearly a Rockhold round, but it was not both of them were 10-9 for each guy, and then the third round all of a sudden the bottom fell out.
Yeah, and you almost think if he hadn't thrown that, we might have ended up with a 5-round great battle. We would have maybe seen similar to the Weidman Machida kind of thing with the last round. Could have been potentially 2-2, and then you just would have seen two guys, pouring their heart out to show you how much they want it. And I'm just like, now Weidman's got to go away, and he's got to have a long rest after that. Like you said, 88 smacks. Now, people may, like you said before, they didn't always connect, but for people at home who don't know, a 4-ounce glove, whether it's blocked or not, it's still a 4-ounce glove hitting you. It's still that power's still coming through your hands to your face, and it's not like his head is not. It's going to go backwards. It's hitting the ground. It's not. There's nothing. It's it's just getting bounced off like a basketball. So, I think he does need to just go and have a little bit of time off. I could see, you can easily see it happen. I can see Rockhold defending his belt in the meantime, and I can see Rockhold coming back and maybe beating someone else and getting a title shot straight away. Because I think Weidman's that talented. I think obviously, he's with two guys with Ray Longo and Matt Serra, who I can't praise enough on a coaching level. Those guys are fantastic in what they do, and the pair of them just work so well together. I see Weidman coming back again by the end of 2016. I can see Rockhold Weidman too easily.
You know what? I'd love to see it happen again. I'd love to see it happen. I'd love to see it, but I also think that you're right. I agree with you 100%. I think that Chris needs to take some time away from the gym, and heal himself up physically, mentally. His not just his brain in the sense of the beating, but kind of the mental side of it. There's just like, this is a guy who's undefeated, and when you lose it for the first time, it does some things to you. So it's good it'd be good for him to take some time away and get his head together, so to speak, and see what happens when he on the other side of it. Yeah,
you're right. Ryan LaFleur came back and fought against Mike Pearson. His first loss was handed to him by Meyer this year. Just got him. He came back, and it looked like LaFleur. I thought he dominated Mike Pearson in the striking game, I think, but he played it safe enough, so he got the win. I think Ryan LaFleur did the right thing when he came back. I thought I thought that was a very intriguing match between Pearson and LaFleur, because obviously Pearson had been out for a while after being Paul Harrest with his ankle, and then Ryan LaFleur again. It's a psychological battle. We've had a guy called Rob Dawson, who is a mind coach. He calls himself a mind strength coach. We've had him on the podcast before talking about the aspects of the psychological warfare on maybe losing and winning and what it takes. And he works with Danny Roberts, who made his debut against Nathan Coy from the UK. He works with him, and it's very intriguing, the weapon that is the mind. It's a huge weapon that is it's not very much talked about in the sport. It's a huge weapon.
Yeah, well, just think about you compete in the sport, so you understand better than most of us. But for those of us who don't compete in the sport but watch it and write about it, just the difference between being at cage side but being outside of it, as opposed to walking inside there, and the only person in there is that referee and an opponent. And that's just that. So aside from the actual what happens once the fight starts, just that stepping in there is some people have to do battle with themselves, especially if they've suffered a defeat. Now there's you can't question yourself. You've got to have the confidence that you're the one that's going to come out on top. Otherwise, why would you want to be in there? So it's I mean, I think that's why some of the most successful gyms are the ones where they have people that focus on that. You think about a guy like Greg Jackson, whose entire mission between rounds of a fight is to calm his fighter. Just get that fighter to breathe and to calm down, and all the strategy that he and Winklejohn are going to pass along, that comes maybe in the last 30 seconds of that 60-second break. But for the first 30 seconds or so, it's all about just calming the mind and calming the body, and that's that's the best medicine, really.
Yeah, Faraz is great. I think he's got a degree in psychology. Faraz Al-Harbi as well. He's a brilliant one for it too.
Absolutely, yeah. Another guy like that. It's these are the guys who are the top of the sport in their own way, and not every one of them approaches it the same. Certainly, a Ray Longo is not going to approach the way a Greg Jackson is, or even the way Faraz is. They all have a different way of approaching their fighters, but it takes it takes something more than just knowing how to to throw a left left hook. You have to know how to manipulate. Well, manipulate sort of usually a bad word, but just maneuver the mind of your athlete to have that person achieve everything they can achieve.
And we spoke about Longo, his guy Sterling, Aljamain Sterling, who again put on a fantastic performance against a very tough, experienced fighter in Johnny Eduardo. Sterling was beautiful with his submission, got a guillotine finish. You got him with his contract now fulfilled. You have Henderson, who recently had his contract fulfilled. Dustin Poirier is on his last fight again. When he fights Duffy, that's his last one with the UFC. There's a handful of fighters that are now starting to maybe test out waters with the free agency. I for one, I'm all for this, because I think not only do fighters find out how much they're worth, but I think the UFC will start to realise that they maybe need to start upping their pay grade to where the fighters can not only be once they've paid off their bills, etc., can have money to spend, so to speak. They can live on what they're getting paid. You look at Sage, who got 40,000, and he got 40-40 because he won for his second fight. I don't know anyone else in the UFC who came in after one fight and then got that kind of increase in pay. I'm quite for this free market testing from fighters.
Yeah, I agree. I'm sort of two minds about it. On the one hand, everything you say, I'm on board with that. I like that. Ultimately, they call it prize fighting for a reason. There has to be a prize. It's not just about going in there and fighting. There has to be a prize at the end of it. There's got to be some pot of gold at the end of the rainbow there, and so I'm all for fighters getting paid as much as they can possibly get paid. Again, I mentioned earlier the idea of fighters having some banding together where they can negotiate with UFC and with other organizations a little more collectively, so that some of the inequities can go away. So yeah, but in whatever way they can do it, I'm always happy when a fighter gets paid. The other side of it, though, as a fan, one of the things we're kind of spoiled when we see that almost all, not all, but almost all of the best fighters in the sport are in the UFC, and so therefore there's always the possibility that if you want to see the best two heavyweights go at it, well, it's gonna be probably in the UFC's title fight, and if you want to see the best two light heavyweights, well, it's gonna be it's generally a UFC fight that's really going to pit the best against the best, and the more fighters start testing the market, and we start seeing some people wandering off to Bellator, or the World Series of Fighting, or ONE FC, or other promotions that might pop up, that will start creating a scenario back in the days when there was the UFC and there was Pride, and everybody thought, well, Fedor Emelianenko is in Pride and he can beat all the UFC's best heavyweights. Oh no, he can't. We've got Randy Couture. He could beat that, and it was all just talk about who was the best guy. You never really were able to see who the best guys were. So that side of it, I feel in a way we're kind of spoiled by having all the best fighters in one place. We have an opportunity to see the best fights. But so it's kind of like, we've got conflicting interests. On the one hand, I want to see them all in one place. On the other hand, I want to see them test the market, and I want to see them get paid the most money they can get paid. And however we can make those two things happen at the same time will be amazing.
Yeah, I feel like it's a bit of a monopoly the UFC have, because like you say, they've got the best of everyone. So they've got that monopoly of going, well, if you don't fight here, you won't get recognised as being the best. But I think I suggested it. I said to Mike, it would be lovely if everyone was just a free agent anyway. So they could, if they wanted to go to, for example, to Rizin, this Rizin card, for example, let's say Fabrizio Verdun went, you know what, I'd love to go and fight Verdun on that card. Which, for I know it's the rematch, I know we've beat him, but the money that he could make from that fight, from Rizin, would be probably a lot more than he will get for this Cain Velasquez fight. So this rematch that's been booked, I just think that it would be lovely if guys were almost free agents in a way where they could maybe go off and do that. And you might see, for example, you got Liam McGeary, who's the light heavyweight champion for Bellator. I'd like to see him maybe get a shot. He might go, do you know what, I'd love to go and fight someone in the UFC, not necessarily Daniel Cormier, but maybe a Gustafsson or someone like that, or a big name. you got KSW down in Poland. You know, there's a handful of promotions out there that you might see a couple of guys cross paths, and it'll just be, that's just something for me anyway. I think if there was a little bit more freedom for fighters, they might get a bit more pay. You know, even if it was like a one fight in their contract, every contract they sign, they get one fight where they can go anywhere they want, fight whoever they wanted, and it, you know, just to make that extra payday.
Yeah, I mean, I think that would be a good system if it could work. Now, what you're talking about is a lot more like the boxing model, where the championship belts are basically all the sanctioning bodies just name a champion if you're the WBC or the WBA champion, that's the belt you wear, but they're not the ones who are promoting the fights. They're getting a sanctioning fee, but they're not promoting the fights. Now that works in the way you're talking, but what's the first thing you think of when you think of boxing? The first word that comes to my mind is dysfunctional. So on the one hand, the UFC is, as the leader of MMA, has really created a lot of order and really helped the sport grow in an orderly fashion. And I think the things that you're talking about would be great. I would love to see that happen, but I would hate to see that start to happen and then all of a sudden the sport become more like boxing, where because like what would be the incentive for some random promoter to, it's like, say you're going to get Liam McGarry fighting against Gustafsson. Let's see who's the best light heavyweight in Europe. So we're going to take these two guys and have them compete. Well, what are you going to do with your undercard? Are you going to fill it the way that UFC filled the 194 undercard, or are you just going to basically try to cash in with one big fight? So there are definitely good things and bad things about that system. Pretty much every system you can come up with. I mean, ultimately, the system we have now actually works in a lot of ways, with the one exception being that the UFC basically pays what it wants to pay, and the fighters, because they do not negotiate collectively, they have very little power. Most of them have very little power. Conor McGregor, he'll have some power. Ronda Rousey, she has a lot of power, but your average fighter who's fighting on the preliminary card, those guys, sort of take what they can get, and that's the kind of thing we really, I think we agree that needs to change.
Yeah, I think it is one of them things. The structure, it's just, that's like a dream for me, is that fighters can maybe just that one-off fight every night. Like you said, like back in the day, if you could have had Fedor and Couture just meet, if Pride and the UFC back in the day could have negotiated and said, look, we'll have a card, UFC versus Pride. You get your guys, we'll get our guys, and we'll have the main event. It's going to be Fedor, Randy, and we'll just make a, that would have been just one of the most amazing moments of everyone's lives, I think, if that happened. But this is just fantasy talk. I think obviously it's a business. They want to keep their business themselves, and stuff like that can't happen, because if everyone in Pride won, then the UFC wouldn't be very marketable. Then they wouldn't have the best fighters. So I understand that as well. Jeff, I'm gonna let you go, because I know you. I know I've kept on for a while, but this is what I wanted to talk fighting. It's been absolutely fantastic having you on. Before I let you go, though, Jeff, can you let people at home know what your social media stuff is, so they can check out what you've been writing about? Because obviously you don't just cover MMA, you cover other sports as well. Can you just spit all this kind of stuff out for everyone?
Sure. And before I say that, John, it's been my pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. I really enjoy this. This is really a lot of fun. So I'm thank you for inviting me on. I'm on Twitter, and I have a very creative handle. It's my name, basically. That's Jeff, Jeff, Wagenheim, Wagenheim, all pushed together, Jeff Wagenheim, at Jeff Wagenheim on Twitter. And you go there, usually I will share different stories I write. I'm writing MMA stories. Nowadays, I'm also writing for the Washington Post, and Sports Illustrated and the Washington Post. I'll be covering the big UFC fights generally, and in addition to that, I will occasionally share things that I write for the Boston Globe, which can be I write some college sports here in the U.S., and I write some arts features, and I write a co-author a parenting column. So I do a lot of different crazy things. Keep myself busy.
Yeah, so ladies and gentlemen, just give them a follow on Twitter, like you say, and you can have a read of what work he does. The reason why I got him in is because I've kept an eye on what Jeff has been doing, and I value what he says, and that's why I got you on, Jeff. I feel sorry that Mike isn't here. Sorry, mate.
The MMA Beat too. I should always mention that we're off now for the holidays. We won't be back on until right after New Year's. But the MMA Beat, that our weekly show with Ariel Hawani as the host, and also the other panelists are Luke Thomas and the great Chuck Mindenhall, the man with the hat, and myself. So that's always a lot of fun as well. Generally on Thursdays here in the U.S. Here where I live, it's 1 o'clock in the afternoon. Where you guys are probably would be, let's see, that would put it around 6 in the evening over there where you're located, right? We 5
1. No. About 6. Yeah, about 6. You're right. Yeah, it would. But if you do miss it, ladies and gentlemen, they do post the video of it on YouTube, so you can go on there, and they also post the audio on. They have on all. I think it's on all networks. Really, I think it's on iTunes, SoundCloud, and everything else. Really, isn't it?
Yeah, but you don't want to do the audio because we're all such really good-looking guys. You want to go with the video. That's the full experience.
Well, it's your shirts as well. You know what? They got your shirts, Chuck's hat, Luke's beard, and of course I suppose you got Ariel as well.
That's right.
Exactly. Right, so, Jeff, honestly, thank you for coming on, ladies and gentlemen. You are going to have Jeff back, I feel. And I think, Jeff, I'd love to have you back on in the future as well after New Year. It would be great to talk to you again about, obviously, goings on in MMA.
You betcha.